It's never been more important than today to align with a strategic lending team or loan officer. The NAR settlement is a game changer. And I know there's so much conversation out there and noise, and you all need help walking through it. Know that the lending industry's been through this before. Different, but similar in the sense that we have had mass legislation change the way that we did things. So that took about with TRID and Dodd-Frank. Know that you're not alone, but choosing the lender that you're going to align with has probably never been more important than now. And here's why. If we think about the process and when these conversations have to be had, it really is at the pre-qualification stage of the process. So that's after the lender has met with the client, had that high trust call with your buyer, has kind of pulled credit, taken the application, worked through all of the logistics, reviewed documentation. Now it's strategy. At this point, this is where you need to know what your options are if the seller is not going to pay your commission. How does it look? From a lending perspective, how can lenders help you have better conversations? And why is it important at the pre-qualification stage? Well, here's why. Traditionally, if we've gone through all of this and we've identified that the buyer needs help with regard to closing costs, let's just say that. Usually we're letting you know, hey, can you think about this? Can you write this into the contract offer? The buyer's going to need X dollars as far as closing costs. The conversation's the same. Now it's you need to know whether the buyer is in a position to pay your commission if you're the buyer's agent. And if not, what are the options? So we've created a finance analysis, and it's walking you through just kind of the different scopes of how this could work. So option one is the buyer's agent commission is built in through the sales price. Option two, maybe the seller is not paying either any buyer's agent commission or maybe not the full amount that the buyer broker agreement calls for. In this case, the strategy may be to increase the purchase price and then ask that the buyer's agent commission be paid in the full amount that matches the buyer compensation agreement. Here's what you need to know about option two. In that scenario, if the buyer is using financing and the house doesn't appraise, we could be back to having to kind of talk about new strategies to reapproach this conversation. So just know that yes, it's an option, and yes, you can build it into the purchase price. So let's think it through. Let's say that maybe it's a $500,000 purchase price as is shown in this analysis, but in option two, maybe the seller wasn't contributing anything towards a buyer's agent commission. Option two, now increasing that price to $515,000, covering, let's just say, a commission rate. I'm using a 3%, but it can be whatever the buyer broker agreement is. In that case, we're increasing the purchase price. The net proceeds to the seller is the same, and essentially you end up kind of financing that cost, if you will. Again, in that scenario, important that the house would appraise. So making sure that you're looking at comps and that there are comps supporting that, in my example, the $515,000 purchase price. Option three is where we'll get creative and kind of assess what the buyer has with regard to assets and funds for a down payment. So in this scenario, I'm showcasing that the buyer has 10% to put down. Well, in option three, in lieu of putting that full 10% down, again, going back and saying, hey, in this scenario, maybe the seller is not contributing anything towards the buyer's agent commission. In option three, then what we are showcasing here is a reduction in the down payment to allow for that to be paid, allow for the buyer's agent commission to be paid with those funds. And then option four is none of this pertains and the buyer chooses just to pay the buyer's agent commission at close of escrow. It is important to know if the buyer just chooses to write the check and pay for the buyer's agent commission, those funds have to be sourced according with the lending guidelines, which means that they have to be documented. We are also changing our process to ensure that we can better align with these changes and help support real estate agents. So when that purchase contract comes in, remember, we've already had the conversation. We had it up in the pre-approval stage. We're likely talking and updating our finance analysis for that buyer based on that property and what you've learned with regard to the buyer broker agreement and maybe whatever the seller is paying with regard to any buyer's agent commission. We're working through that. Now the contract is accepted. If anything's changing or not changing, when that contract comes in, it is very important that a lender verify and know what the numbers are, meaning whatever the seller is or is not contributing and how that relates to the buyer-broker agreement. If there is a differential, meaning maybe the seller is paying 2% and maybe the buyer broker is a 3%, therefore we've got to solve for 1%. That's where these strategies in this analysis will work, but we've got to know these numbers. So we're going to be asking for the details because we know we're going to have to source those funds, and we want to be sure that the buyer is aware and that we have the documentation we need to get to the finish line. My fear is that if lenders are not thinking through this and they have not adapted their processes to allow for this additional step or verification, if you will, then you may get down to the finish line and those funds not be accounted for, which could delay the process or could potentially put you in a position where your compensation may have to change or the loan doesn't get approved. So we want to avoid all that. We got to back it up and put it back earlier into the process, and that for us is going to start at the pre-qualification stage. We now know what the buyer funds are. We now know what we're trying to solve for with regard to additional funds may be needed, down payment, etc. This is solvable. I promise you, we're all going to get through it. Take a breath. If you need a strategic lending partner to kind of walk through some of what is going on, feel free to reach out. 480-725-0150. Also, click the link in the description for the analysis of kind of showcasing an example of how the money would work and the different options that I walked through. If you want one specific to your buyer, again, just reach out to us and we can help navigate that. And know when you work with us, this type of finance analysis is what we do for every single one of your buyers. I'm sharing this with you because I've been through this in my career. I know the apprehension and the anxiety and the fear and oh my gosh, we got to change things. Change doesn't have to be bad. And this is one of those things that we are going to get through. If you have questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out. Like, subscribe, comment, know that we're here for you. We're going to get through this.